Okay, so this is not going to Twitter. Well, hi friends, hello and welcome to another video. We are today broadcasting to Media Without Means and Jerry's take on China on YouTube. First of all, I would like to welcome Jerry to our show and introduce our topic. So, Jerry, what are we talking about today? And could you tell us a little bit about the title of today's video?
Okay, we're talking about the recent spate, and it's being completely sensationalized by Western media. There have been a few incidents. When you've got a population of 1.4 billion people, that's hardly surprising. But there have been a few tragic incidents, and there was another one yesterday where cars are driving into people. And we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about what we think about it, what we know about it, and then we're going to have a little speculation and make sure that people understand these are our opinions. But ultimately, what we want to do is to leave people when they have finished watching this video with the understanding that it's not what the Western media are portraying it to be. So that's what we're talking about today.
Great. So let us first kind of like summarize some of the things that have been taking place that have moved us to do this show. Part of it has to do with what has taken place, but the focus of my channel and this video is to talk about the coverage, how these events are being covered. And we're trying not to go into whataboutism, but we want to try and give some perspective as to what has taken place. So over the last 10 days or so, we saw a couple of incidents. The first one took place in Zhuhai, the night prior to the International Air Show in Zhuhai, where somebody drove a car into the sports center where people were exercising. During the event, 35 people died and about 43 to 42 people were injured. Reports at the time say that they were not fatal injuries, so everybody that was hurt was expected to do a full recovery after some time. Then we had the Wuxi stabbing, which happened at a college. Apparently, it was a disgruntled student who had issues with his graduation papers and with the internship that he was doing at the university. That ended up with 8 people being killed and 17 being injured. We also had the incident in Hunan near a school where a car rammed into some pedestrians that included some children and adults that were getting to the school. That one, to my understanding, did not leave any deaths. I think that's everything, or correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry?
That's what the Western media have got hold of, and Chinese media are kind of playing it down, which again, the Western media says is censorship of the news. It's not at all. It's kind of playing down because, as the title of this show says, crazy people sometimes just do crazy things. And crazy people seeing something like this may say, "Oh, I can do that too." And look at the attention it will bring to me, because it is bringing massive attention in Western media. And so this is the reason why Chinese media plays it down. 36 people were injured yesterday in Changde, which is not yet been established whether or not that was deliberate. It's possible, like a few months ago in Shandong, a bus went out of control, and I think it killed 11 people. It hit a bus stop, and it wasn't the bus driver's fault. The bus went out of control, and something went wrong with the bus, and people died, and that's a tragic accident as opposed to a mass murder. And also something else I want to point out, that this situation in Zhuhai is the worst murder in China since they stopped the terrorist attacks from the Xinjiang Uyghurs. There hasn't been a murder attack of this size since that time. So that's something else to point out. This is not a regular thing. Do you mind if I read a paragraph from CNN's report about particularly the incident? This was a paragraph relating to the incident yesterday. It said, and I'm going to read it from another computer here: high-profile attacks in recent months have rattled a population long used to low rates of violent crime. Now, I'll stop there for a moment and come back to it. Long long used to low rates of violent crime. So that's telling the world that CNN is saying there's very little violent crime in China. And it's worth noting that and remembering that whatever else happens, if there are more things happening, it's worth noting that in a population of 1.4 billion people, these are aberrations. These are not daily events. Unlike, we're not going to go into whataboutism, I know, but unlike places like America and the UK, where there are stabbings and shootings on a daily basis. I should have put that in the other way around. Respectively, there are shootings and stabbings on a daily basis. USA has the shootings and UK has the stabbings. So it says high-profile attacks. Well, then it goes on to say that censors have scrambled to remove videos posted to social media and moderate online discussion to minimize any perception of social instability. So there's a contradiction here. A high-profile attack is being censored, so it's not high-profile. Yeah, so there's a real contradiction there in Western media. They want to sensationalize this by saying these are high-profile attacks, and then they want to diminish China's efforts, if that's the right word, to dampen down social media to prevent crazy people doing crazy things again. And then they're accusing it of social instability. I can assure you, I mean, you and I both lived in China many, many years. We've got 45 years of experience between us. And we know China is pretty much the most stable place we've ever lived in. That's for sure. It's not about social instability. This is about crazy people doing crazy things. So we have an admission that there are long, long periods of very low crime. And then we have an admission that it is a high-profile attack, and an admission that they think China is censoring it because of something to make it a non-high-profile attack. So that's just it's about 20 words there. There's a whole heap of things that we can unravel. It goes on to explain the sudden episodes of violence apparently targeting random members of the public, which is not true for the Zhuhai one. That was a man targeting a lot of people. Yes, they were random members of the public, but he was actually disgruntled with his wife and his wife's lover who exercised at that point. Now, one thing that's missing in all the media, British, American, anything, where is his wife? Where is the lady who he wanted to kill so badly? Was she one of the victims? Was she not there at all? Was she a witness to this? I don't know. We don't know anything about his wife. She's disappeared off the scene. Now, that's not Chinese media or Chinese government censoring anything. That is just what China does. It says this is not the business of the public. The public don't have a right to know what this lady is doing, what this lady is thinking. She must be, if she wasn't killed in this incident, she must be devastated by what her husband did and by what the media are accusing her husband of doing because of her. So that must be a devastating thing to live with. So they're
That
giving
privacy is important.
Yes,
The privacy of that
absolutely.
woman,
Yeah,
it needs to be protected, and in China, it's one of the reasons why it is protected. Jerry, I
correct.
wanted to move into another question. A lot of people are speculating or trying to figure out the reasons for these attacks, the reasons for these kind of events here in China. Um, we hear Western media tell us that these are just disgruntled people who are acting because of the economic slowdown.
Mhm.
Um, what is your take on that argument?
Well, the economy hasn't slowed down. It's as simple as that. That's a lie. That's a myth. There are factors of the economy that are being cherry picked as to say, to indicate that the economy has slowed down. So we know that the economy hasn't slowed down, but we do know that the economy has undergone certain challenges. We know youth employment is a challenge, but that was probably related or possibly related to the second incident, but that wasn't related to youth unemployment. That
Hmm.
boy had a job, he had an internship, and he expected to get paid and suddenly found that this is an internship, you don't get paid for this. He thought he had a job and he was doing an internship. So there was some confusion there. Whether or not that's a problem with his mental state or a problem with the information he was given. I don't know. That will come out eventually if there is a trial. Because in each of these cases, the three cases that we're talking about today, in each one, the perpetrator, if that's the right word to use, I hate that American word, but the person responsible has been arrested in each of these three cases. Now, in the case of the first one, this guy stabbed himself, apparently in the neck. He stabbed himself in the neck and the chest. So he was trying to kill himself. And he was, at the time that was reported a few days ago, in an intensive care in the local hospital under police watch. So they're going to talk to him about what he did and what his reasoning was. They're going to talk to the kid. They've already talked to the kid, who obviously has mental problems because he failed his university course. He obviously didn't get along too well with his working colleagues in his internship. And the third one, which was just last night, we still don't know whether it was an accident, whether it was deliberate. The other thing the CNN says that these violent events often target school children. They're not targeting school children. They're usually because the parent of one child has a problem. So it's not social society. It's not the finalizers. If I could just finish this, we're talking about 20 words here. The sudden episodes of violence that only just started recently, apparently targeting random members of the public, including school children, however, have surged across the country as economic growth stutters. Yesterday or 2 days ago, the IMF changed its forecast on China upwards. The Chinese economy released its figures for the third quarter, and they are more positive than the second quarter. They are on target to reach their 5% growth for the year. 5% growth is not an economic stutter. It's less than previous years. There is no doubt about it. Last year was 5% too. Unemployment is 5% and reducing. So it's not going up. It's reducing. Instability in the retail industry doesn't exist. Costs are fixed. Prices are reasonable throughout the country. There are no high inflation. There is no high interest. Most people in China don't have mortgages. So this is not social instability that is on a national level. This is crazy people doing crazy things at a crazy time. Now, why are they doing it? We don't know. That needs to be established, but it's not what the West are portraying it to be. So it's not about the instability in society, and it's not about the instability in the economy.
Jerry, I want to ask you to explain, because I think this is what a lot of people don't understand about China and China's way of dealing with incidents such as these. The question that a lot of people are asking themselves is, why is the social media coverage so different here in China? Why is it that it's, in a way, censored? Is there a reason for that? And what explains what the government tries to do? Or is this an accurate depiction of what takes place here in China as a consequence of events like those?
Yeah. You have a lot of people don't really understand it until they've lived in China for a while. Even when we first come here, we don't understand this. You have freedom of speech in China. You have freedom of religion. You have freedom of choice. You have freedoms in China that you don't have in the West. You have the freedom to drink a beer in the street in China. Simple things in life that used to be normal in the West are completely normal here, and they're not normal anymore in the West. So is it freedom of speech? The question is, what is freedom of speech? Now, in any country that has a developed rule of law, you have parameters under which you can say things and parameters outside of which you can't say things. So it's as simple as that. There's a sphere. You can be extreme right, extreme left, whatever it is that you decide. But at the bottom line of this is, there has to be some constraints on freedom of speech. You can't have unfettered total freedom of speech. In China, they have laws. They don't allow dissension. They don't allow separatism, terrorism. They don't allow aggression. They don't allow proselytization. So they don't allow people to try and promote their religion. You have total freedom of religion, but you have to want it. You can't have it shoved down your throat. We don't have Jehovah's Witnesses knocking on our doors. It's impossible to do that. It's illegal, and they will be stopped. So when someone in the West says, oh, China has no freedoms, I would say China actually has more freedoms, but it has clearly defined those freedoms. In England, UK, you have the Magna Carta going back to 1215, I think it was. When the Magna Carta was signed, you got the right of habeas corpus. That means bring forward the body, which allows you to have the presumption of innocence, bail conditions, and things like that. In America, you have the Constitution, which gives you those rights. And in Australia, they have a constitution too, which gives human rights under the United Nations, not written into the Australian Constitution. Now, they're the ones I know about. But every country that has a rule of law has some parameters. And China's parameters are no aggression, no violence, no religion, no expert opinions unless you are an expert. So I can't give you opinions on Chinese social media about whether or not you should have a COVID vaccination. You can't, because I'm not a COVID doctor. Now, COVID doctors did, and they said you should have the vaccination. So the people listen to that because they trust there is no media manipulation, media misinformation, freedom of speech for an opinion that is expressed and shown to you as a valid fact when it's actually an invalid opinion. And this is a problem that the West has, and they don't understand why Chinese people trust their media or trust their social media, because they do limit what's allowed to be shown, and they limit it for a very good reason. It prevents that misinformation, and it creates an atmosphere of trust. So I think that's the difference between these two societies. And it takes people like us to bridge those two cultures, where in the West we can say whatever we want, anything we want. But then someone will knock on your door at 2:00 in the morning with guns and say, you said something on social media that worried us.
I'm here.
Well, they don't do that in China. They just cut you off.
Yeah, they just censor your video and say this is not to be watched.
Yeah, we're not going to let you put this out.
I want to pivot a little bit to one of the key things that we discussed in preparation that we wanted to talk about. You mentioned the freedom of a speech, and there's no better example of that freedom than the freedom that certain reporters like Stephen McDonald from the BBC has to literally present his opinion with that absolute zero evidence. And I'm referring to the report that he did in Zhuhai. And there are many questions that you ask in your video, which I will link in the description of this video, that you need to watch and understand. But one of the things that I noticed is that he says these people are obviously organized by the party. I focus on the word obviously.
Yeah.
When you watch that video, whoever is watching this video right now, or you, Jerry, there is absolutely nothing indicating that that person is a member of the Communist Party of China, the CPC. Yet you have Stephen McDonald telling us that this is obviously organized by the CPC. That's the first thing that struck my mind when I said, like, hold on one second. Why are you saying this on live TV without zero evidence? And as you pointed out also in your video, him and Edward Lawrence, his cameraman, were able to walk out of that place without being arrested, without being questioned by police, with their cameras and with their memory cards intact so that they could continue their work at the Zhuhai International Air Show. So China has that level of freedom of speech where people, journalists, are allowed to do something as irresponsible as that. What is your commentary on that particular coverage as we start pivoting towards, well, coverage of events by journalists here in China?
Yeah.
Jerry?
I think it's clear that Stephen McDonald is a contradiction of his own terms. He's the guy saying that China is oppressive, China is authoritarian, and yet he lives in China and has done for many years. I'm not sure how many years, but probably as long as us. It's either close to or maybe even over 20 years. He's been here with the ABC of Australia, first of all, and then with the BBC. He is their man in China. So he knows China. He still calls it the CCP instead of the correct name, the CPC. And he is a perfect example of a contradiction of his own narrative. He still lives here and he still reports these lies and misinformation from here. Now, words matter. He has a master's degree in journalism. He would know words matter. When you say the word obviously, you are saying something is a fact. When you say the words I think or in my opinion, you're offering something that other people can debate and you can disagree with. But when you say obviously, you are stating something as an absolute. He said, this man is obviously organized by the party. Well, the party didn't have anything to do with this, the police did. And if he was organized, that's terrible organization for a government that can really organize things well. He really is a contradiction of his own narrative. He says this guy's obviously organized by the party. Well, first of all, the party had nothing at all to do with this. The party governs the country, but it doesn't manage police matters in a second-tier city 2,500 kilometers away from Beijing. The government of the city does that, the administration of the city. Yes, there are party members in that, but this is a police matter. So maybe he was organized by the police. So there's the first contradiction. Maybe is not obviously. There's the second contradiction. And thirdly, if he'd been organized to prevent people like Stephen McDonnell doing his job, surely he would not have been one person. Had he been a police officer, he would have been an awful lot busier than he was, just wandering around like that and saying, no, stop the filming. He would have been very busy that night because there was a massive event just 100 meters away. There was a massive event with 35 people dead and 43 people injured, and he wasn't anything to do with that. I would suggest, looking at the guy, he was probably waiting for information. There's one scene, and nobody's alluded to this, but Andy Borum showed the whole video and did a little analysis of the video, which was brilliant, by the way. And Andy was going to join us today, but unfortunately can't. Andy got, through his headphones, Ed Lawrence, the cameraman, saying, "Keep going, Steve, keep going." So that tells you something about Stephen McDonnell and Ed Lawrence as well. But in the background of the picture, there is an image, and it lasts for about a second or two, where there's a guy fronting up to a police officer with the finger going like this to the police officer. And you can just see it for a second or two. The police officer was like, yeah, I know. Someone's looking for information, not getting it fast enough. I mean, this is a huge event. When 35 people are dead, the police don't know what happened. They're still busy handling the issues related to 35 people dead, 43 people injured, hundreds of ambulances required, because you just don't know how many are going to be needed. And then you've got all these people coming around. What's going on? What's going on? My wife's in there. Well, we'll get to you when we can. And that was what was going on. People were shouting at a police officer, and it was quite clear they weren't afraid of the police. So the police were there doing the job that they were there to do, not to upset Stephen McDonnell. He was deliberately, and Andy analyzed this brilliantly, he was deliberately, and I don't use that word, I use that word willfully, deliberately. Stephen McDonnell deliberately strung out his video as long as he could, repeating himself over and over again, just so somebody would interfere with his, and he'd get that, what they call the money shot in pornography.
I think there's something to say about this idea in China about white people with cameras. I would like to refer you to the coverage of the Zhengzhou floods a couple of years ago, where it was Robin Brandt was reporting right in front of a subway station where several people had perished because of the floods. And his words at the time were 12 people were left behind. That kind of wording, when you can see all the efforts and all the work and all the struggle to try and rescue everybody, are a disservice to that effort, to that work. These people are, using language to diminish these rescue efforts that are taking place at any given time.
Mm.
That Robin Brand ended up being a person that people were sharing the pictures of on social media in China. It was
Yeah.
like, this person is vilifying our rescue teams and the efforts that were, and basically using the death of those 12 people to create a headline that is going to be sensationalization of something that took place. It was
Mm.
unfortunate that 12 people died, but they were not left behind as in expressing a certain purpose of
Yes.
not rescuing them.
Yeah.
So again, freedom of speech has certain limitations. Um, I wanted to also address other cases of these foreigners, these journalists that
Yeah.
get into trouble for the reporting that they do. Um, in preparation, we talked about another case. Would you like to share that with us, please, Jerry?
You're talking about the Bill Birtles and Michael Smith event. Bill
Correct.
Birtles worked for the ABC in Australia. Lei Gong was an SBS. She was a Chinese-born Australian citizen, who was arrested and pled guilty and was imprisoned for a spying offence. She was convicted and imprisoned after pleading guilty and put into prison. And the Australians were obviously very concerned about that. An Australian citizen was put into prison. Another one's just gone into prison in Hong Kong as well. But he's an Australian who's lived 15 years in Hong Kong. So I mean, he's born in Hong Kong and lives in Hong Kong, but they call him an Australian. Uh, I wonder if they'd call me an Australian and protect me if something happened to me because I've lived 20 years in China. They'd probably just say, oh, no, he decided to live in China. Let's wipe our hands of him. Because it depends whose narrative side you're on. Now, Bill Birtles, who worked for the ABC, and Michael Smith, who worked both still working for those organizations, the Australian Financial Review, were invited by the police to come and have a cup of tea. Now, this is a euphemism in China. We've got some questions for you. Come down to the police. You're not being arrested. You're just being asked to come down to the police station because we've got some questions for you. So they were both invited. And instead of going to the police station, they went immediately to the Australian embassy, which I think is very strange. If I went to the Australian embassy and said the police want to talk to me, they'd say, well, go and talk to the police. Why would the police protect me if I've broken the law, or if the police have something about me? And it's quite clear in all the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade materials, if you break the law in China, we can't protect you. We can represent you, but we can't protect you because you've broken the law in a foreign country, any country, not just China anyway. So they won't protect me if I break the law. Now, Bill and Michael Birtles and Smith were invited to go to the police station because they wanted to ask some questions about their relationship with Lei Gong, who was put into prison. And instead of going to the police station, they went to the embassy. The embassy called the police and said, these guys are here. If you want to interview them, you may do so on diplomatic premises. So the police went and asked them some questions. And then the same day, without leaving the diplomatic premises, they were escorted to the airport and put on flights outside of China. Now, Smith wrote a book about it. Birtles has written articles about it. They're making money from this event. Now, I don't know if anyone else can think of a time when a government has escorted somebody from the country that the police have an interest in talking to. Now, had they been spies, I'm certain the police would have just arrested them. And then the government would have been involved in negotiations and trying to get them representation so that they didn't get convicted and they didn't get sentenced. And maybe diplomatic efforts would have been made to keep these two journalists out of prison. But the other journalists went to prison. So there was obviously a spying issue. And these two journalists were not arrested. They were invited. They decided not to go. I think something very strange went on at that stage. I don't know what it is, but something very strange went on. And Bill Birtles is now, I think, in Indonesia. Michael Smith is in Taiwan. Or last time, I don't follow their careers. In fact, I avoid everything to do with what they say, except if I'm debunking them. But yeah, that's an interesting one. And there's another guy, John Sudworth. Do you want to talk about him too?
Well, John Silver was basically the person who went to visit these vocational training centers in
And
Xinjiang
factories, and
and
factories.
factories, and he was shown what they were doing there: preservation of culture, teaching them Mandarin, giving them skills, all part of a, a double side effort. One
Mhm,
was prepare the people for the development that was coming to Xinjiang,
mhm.
the factories, the investment, the companies, the opportunities, the business. So these people needed to learn new skills in order to embrace what was coming in terms of investment. The second thing was, well, some of them were to um, work on some extremist inclinations or some radicalization inclination. And key to all this was some of the things that were said during his reporting, where they say like, oh, they stay here Monday to Friday, and he shows a bus of those people leaving the center for the weekend. Um, but his reporting was that they were not allowed to leave.
Mhm.
That was pretty remarkable, and that got him in hot waters. So he basically wanted, he was about to be sued, if I'm not mistaken, and
Yep.
he decided to leave the country. Do you have any other details about Sudworth?
Yeah, my understanding from what I've heard, and I actually know people involved in this, was that he was just about to be served papers uh, because he had lied about what he had seen and what he'd reported. He'd reported lies from that from the discussions and the interviews that he was given. This is a BBC reporter who went to Xinjiang, was shown everything he asked to see, and then managed to manufacture the money shot. He did that himself. He was standing outside of a factory filming into it in order to get the security guard, not a police officer, the security guard came out and said, hey, you can't do that. And then the police did get called, and the police, this is what they do. They do this very, very well. They put a narration over the discussion to tell
So
us
you
what's
can't hear.
going on. Yeah, we can't hear the police saying, well, do you have a permit? No, we don't have a permit. All we hear is the police came along and told us that we couldn't film here. That's what they do. That is the media manipulation and misinformation that they're doing. So eventually they were asked to leave, and they left. And then they were followed away by this SUV with four hoods in it, that kind of thing. So they're filming a car that's following them, or are they filming another vehicle that's going in the same direction as them with four people in it? Let's slow down or speed up until we can see a car that's got four people in it, and we'll film it and pretend it's the police. The police are not so stupid. This is what they call an authoritarian state. If it is an authoritarian state, these guys are experts at covert surveillance. My call in my video was that probably the translator in their car with them was laughing up her sleeve because she's the informant to the Ministry of State Security, not not the four guys following them who are going to a mining site somewhere in the same region that they're traveling to. So that's what happened to him.
Another,
He was going to be served papers. Now, the interesting thing about being served papers is once you are in the legal system in China, this is where
not
the
allowed to go.
social credit score myth comes out, you are blacklisted from travel. If you're in the legal system and you are going to be facing a court, facing a court for either debt or something like this is a civil matter, the court will say you can no longer travel into city. You can't use your WeChat. You can use WeChat, but you can't use your WeChat wallet. You have to use cash. You can't book into hotels because you book into hotel unless you go to the hotel, walk in. As soon as you show your ID card or your passport, you're blacklisted. It says, oh, we can't keep you here. So you can go into a hotel and try and book, but you can't. So these are the
Another
people. Go on.
another example of these money shots that we were talking
Yeah.
about is the Dutch reporter that was reporting from the
In
Winter
the
Olympics in
Olympics.
Beijing,
Mhm.
where basically he's going live and he's in a place where he's not allowed. And somebody from the organizers comes and said like, you cannot shoot here, you need to shoot over there. And then this back and forth, this is struggle, this like what, and this is going live. The most telling thing about that interaction from this Dutch reporter is his smirk. He
He
knows
got the
this
money
is
shot.
gold. It's like you can see it in his face. He's going like, yeah, this is
Yeah,
exactly what I wanted. So it's an important thing to consider when we hear someone like Edward Lawrence says, "Keep going, Steve. Keep going, Steve." This is the demonization. This is the vilifying that they are seeking and that they want. And when they get it, it's gold. It's gold for
yeah,
them, and it serves the purpose of demonizing and vilifying China for what
yeah.
they're doing. When what is taking place is something as ordinary as being organized. Like, hey, your media, you're supposed to be over there, not over here.
Yeah,
You don't shoot
yeah.
whatever you want.
There's the
You
media
shoot what we
box.
tell you.
There's the media
This is the
enclave. Yeah, go
this is
sit
the
in it.
Winter Olympics. This is hundreds and thousands of people
And a great
from media
example
covering
happened
this event.
yesterday. I saw this on Twitter yesterday, and it's been posted several times. Sir Keir Starmer, started speaking to Xi Jinping inside of a meeting, and then suddenly the Chinese minders moved all the cameras out. Well, no, that wasn't suddenly the Chinese minders did anything at all. What happens in these meetings is you go
Protocol.
into these meetings, you exchange pleasantries, and the cameras are allowed to watch you. And then when the nuts and guts of the meeting start, the cameras are removed. Now, in this case, Sir Keir Starmer, probably quite deliberately did this. He said, I'm going to go straight into, instead of pleasantries, I'm going to go straight into challenging China when the cameras are still on me. He sat down and started challenging China. The cameras were still there, and then they got moved out. That is normal. That was a setup. That's another media misinformation. And again, I'm going to say this because I know words matter. That was obviously a setup. That was clearly a setup. That's not my opinion. That's a fact. That was set
Mm,
up. Now, how do we prove that? Much more difficult to prove, but that was a setup. The only way you could prove that is to find out who the camera was, because one of those cameramen would have been told, keep your camera rolling, Sir Keir Starmer is going to do something. That's a setup,
mhm.
because it's the first time it's ever happened.
Just like what happened to Mr. Gao, one of the he used to be the translator
Yeah, for Deng
for Deng
Xiaoping.
Xiaoping, I think.
Mm.
And he was interviewed by I forget his name. Um,
Mehdi
and he's
Hassan.
going, yeah, he's going in this forum, and all the people asking questions from the floor are people who had grievances with China. So there
Yeah,
are Uyghurs in exile. There's Hong Kong
democracy.
rioters that left the country,
Hong Kong
and they all
democracy.
the ones that are randomly picked to ask questions and
Yeah,
to corner Mr. Gao in that event. So we can see how media is planting these words, language, stories,
mhm.
and even audience members to vilify
Yeah,
and create that headline. Now, I wanted to draw our attention to what can be done. What are solutions? And the point is, what are solutions to this type of media coverage? And what are solutions to these attacks? And I think that with that we could wrap up our video.
yeah.
Somebody just asked in the comment section a very interesting question that I posted, but it went out. Let me see if I can find it. But the main idea, or the main topic is, what can the government do? Let me see if I can bring it back up.
Yeah, I can't see the comments, unfortunately.
Hmm.
I can see
Give
comments
you
on my
guys.
own channel, but not on yours. What can
Okay.
the government do? Let's answer this while you're finding it. There's a lot of things the government can do. Obviously, they have already. In 2014, there were knife attacks. Back 10, 12, and 15 years ago, there were a few knife attacks around schools. And the government did what it can do in order to prevent that. Every single school now has a pass entry, an identification entry. Every single school now has two police officers on the front gate, and there is only one gate in and one gate out of the school. Kids are not allowed out. This is primary school and kindergarten. Kids are not allowed out until their parents are there to collect them. In the senior schools, the high schools and middle schools, the kids are allowed out, but there are two police officers there every single moment that the kids are coming in or out of school. There are police officers there, and there are barriers and identification only people who have an identification card can get into the school or go through the security and get a temporary pass like any secure environment. So the schools have been changed. I think the same kind of thing is going to happen now with sporting events. I'm fairly sure that will happen. So I think that's one of the things that the Chinese government can do. Another thing that the Chinese government can do is better administration of mental health. The Chinese mental health system is underdeveloped. China is a country that is still developing. Despite what Western media says, China is still a developing nation. And one of those developments is it's picking up in disabilities, it's picking up in mental disabilities or mental health care, but it hasn't got there yet. It does not have the same systems that the West has to protect. There's no such thing as the Samaritans, for example. The Samaritans is a British organization. If you're thinking about suicide, you can call the Samaritans and someone will listen to what you have to say. If you're thinking bad thoughts, pick up the phone and dial. We haven't got that yet in China. We will. But these things have to happen. They have to change slowly and solidly. China is very good at doing it. Can the Chinese government remove these fake news and blacklist them? The answer to that is no, and nor should they, in my opinion. Here's what happens with Stephen McDonnell. I believe that Stephen McDonnell is probably the devil you know, which is better than the devil you don't know. They allow him to stay here because they know he's a buffoon. He has no response to anyone who challenges him except to block them. And he does that religiously. He blocks every person, including me, who challenges him. I've challenged him a couple of times. I am the bike riding bozo. He calls you names and then blocks you. He is a child. The government knows this. And they know that he's harmless to them because you cannot hide the truth. And the truth will eventually come out that he's wrong. So China is not really concerned about how the BBC views or perceives China. They're not concerned about how the people of the UK are being informed because they're going to allow the UK to come and visit 15 days. This happens every time they have meetings, or they will if the UK capitulates on its provocations. Now, they've done it for Australia. Any Australian can come to China for 15 days. Now, what this means is you can have a month holiday in China quite easily by coming here for 14 days, go over to Hong Kong or Macau for a day, not even a full day, just go to Hong Kong, buy a burger, and then come back. And that gives you another 15 days. Now, you could do that forever under this current system. Now, they may eventually say, you live in China or what? But yeah, eventually they might say to you, you need to leave, but you can come over here on and off as much as you wanted just by visa-free entry and then go to Hong Kong or Macau and then come back again. So these people who want to are seeing China as it really is, and they are reporting. Now, we both know that there are massive numbers of YouTubers coming to China. When you and I started doing this, we were considered CCP shills, as we've been called today by Stephen McDonnell, no less. We are CCP shills and bozos. So we're the people that you can say, okay, this guy's lived in China a long time. Perhaps he's paid by the Chinese government. And I say, okay, perhaps I am. I'm not, but perhaps I am. Where's the lie? Tell me where the lie is. If you can prove that I'm telling lies, you've got a point. If you can't, then it really doesn't matter if I'm paid or not paid. I wish I was. I mean, I'd love to get paid by the Chinese government for what I do, and it would be worthwhile. But there's an interesting thing, this authoritarian state. I'm 66 years old. Once you've retired in China, you don't go back into the workforce. They can't give me a working visa, and that means they'd be breaking their own laws if they paid me. Oh, get your head around that, Stephen McDonnell. You know the law. Get your head around it. So the people who are coming here and making these videos, every single one of them is saying, wow, this is not what I expected. I've been misled. I've been misinformed. You cannot keep hiding this. And that's why the BBC won't be banned, because they are going to look more and more foolish. Now, there's another aspect that I have. Stephen McDonnell is not a journalist. He's a reporter. He's a stenographer. He's a guy who goes looking for trouble and then puts that onto the BBC. Had he been a real journalist, You and I both know there are embarrassing stories in China. There are government oversights. There are government bureaucracies. There is corruption. There's all kinds of things wrong in China that a good journalist could root out, find out about, and write reports on. So I think the government quite likes Stephen McDonnell here because he can't find the good stuff. And if they banned him and the BBC sent a real reporter, might
That's
be
a story.
embarrassing. Yeah. So there you go. That's part of the reason. But no, they won't ban him. I don't think they may eventually say we're not going to renew your visa. They may do that. I don't know.
Hmm.
But his life is in China. He lives in
I want
China.
to
Go on.
I want to mention something interesting. Again, we are trying not to do whataboutism, but it's
Yeah.
something that gives us context. In the United States, there's something called the FARA, or the Foreign Agent Registration Act,
Mhm.
which one modification to this particular act is that they want to expand the definition of foreign agent to include media outlets that receive more than 20% of the funding from abroad. That's what the US does. Imagine if China were to follow that example. Where would that put somebody like these BBC reporters
Mhm.
um, when BBC is funded by
Yeah.
the UK government? That would
The
be
UK
interesting.
and
But China
Australia
doesn't
both
have
have
that.
the same thing. This is a registration of foreign influence. Now, there's a
Hmm.
difference between foreign influence and foreign interference. Foreign interference is basically spying. Foreign influence is diplomacy. You and I
Hmm.
are influencers we are agents of foreign influence. We are both, in our own way, supporting China, which is an adversarial country to the countries that well, not so much you from Colombia, but definitely me from the UK and Australia, and definitely any American who's in China. But the thing is, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, is that what it's called? Foreign Agents
Yeah,
Registration, the
FARA.
Registration Act, FARA, and the registration of foreign influence in Australia, and the same thing in the UK. They both say you must be paid by the government. Now, proving that would be a hell of a lot more difficult. What we do is freedom of speech. If
Hmm.
they are to prosecute you or me in America, Australia, or the UK for what we do, then they are in breach of their freedom of speech conventions. In Australia, it's convention. In America, it's constitution. But because we are not paid, we are not agents of foreign influence. We are people who freely speak about our own experiences online. There's the difference. Now, if I write an article for Global Times, which I do, or Beijing Review, which I have done, or Global People and China Daily and Guangming, I write articles for these people and I do get paid. That officially makes me an agent of foreign influence. And according to Australia, if I were to fly back, or the UK, if I were to fly back, I am an unregistered agent of foreign influence, which is why I won't go back to either of those countries. It's too dangerous for someone to have an opinion, especially if that opinion is paid for. Now, China does not ask me to write these articles for a favorable opinion. I write these articles for a favorable opinion, and China says, can we use this? There's a difference, but it does not stop me being in breach of these particular acts. If I set foot in any American protectorate, or America, I never will, but if I were to
You
set
might be
foot there,
snatched.
yeah, I'd be snatched for sure, for sure.
Hmm.
And then it would cost me the rest of my life to get out of that.
The last thing that I wanted to suggest as solutions to these attacks, and you were talking about um, one of the things that I want to kind of like focus on is all these security guards and all these schools and educational centers. Um, how prepared are they? Privately, you and I were discussing how does a person with a knife manages to kill 8 people and hurt 17 without being stopped? So that's
It
a
was
question to be
outside of
asked.
the school. That's the problem.
Hmm.
You can't stop things happening in the street.
Hmm.
The schools are protected. The kids in the school are protected by security. The security guards are quite well trained. They have these, what Adrian Zenz likes to call cattle prods. Uh, they,
Hmm.
they
The
are
big
a
baton thing.
restrainer. Yes, a stick with a half moon on the end of it. And they two people come at you with one of those, one low and one high, you're down. It's really,
Mm.
really effective. I've watched them training with this, and it's very effective. So I mean, it's non-lethal, but it's very effective. And that's what, none of these guys are armed in the schools. They
Hmm.
have batons, they have torches, they have these restraints, but they're not armed. This is a non-lethal thing. So inside the schools, our kids are safe.
I'm
Outside the
thinking
schools,
about the school areas. They all have these signs with reduce your speed because you're entering a school area.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Here's a thought. Here's an idea. Here's a technological suggestion. What if there are speed traps that automatically activate blades that will slash the tires going in a certain direction? So the speed trap is looking in this direction. You're coming at more than 10 kilometers an hour. Phew, the blades come up, slash your
It's,
tires.
it's a bit
You
harsh on
you
anyone
become.
doing 12 kilometers past the school, but yeah, I think maybe what we need to do with things like that, you've got to, as a former police officer, I'm not a big fan of speed traps and things like that. But what you're
Mhm,
suggesting there is valid. I would suggest something like that would be useful, but only, I mean, they've got speed humps outside of most schools as well, so you can't go too fast. But then, if your intention is to kill people, which crazy people do have that intention, then those speed humps are not going to slow you down because you don't care about the damage to your car. You're just going to go flying over the speed humps. I would suggest that probably that there's got to be something done about that because it's outside of schools that these are happening. It's in the
mhm,
sports stadium that these are happening. And there are many cameras. I mean, they capture these people straight away. Public support is massive for doing something for this. No question about that. Government support will be massive to make sure this doesn't happen again. Media support will be massive to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And there've got to be ways. Now, as a police officer, I would say you cannot put something down that will destroy someone's car if they're doing 5 kilometers over the limit outside of a school, because you can get several cars destroyed in the first week you do that. What you can do is you say, okay, if someone is doing double the speed limit outside of a school, we need to put a barrier up. Bang. Uh,
mhm.
that's a
Or these
possibility.
boulders that automatically come up within a
Yeah.
fraction of a
Well,
second to
but then
protect the
you
people.
could potentially cause the death of a driver who was doing nothing more than rushing to the hospital because his wife is pregnant. That's, or the pregnant wife. That's the problem. You could capture innocent people in that kind of a trap, and that's the difficulty with that. But for sure,
Mhm,
there needs to be something that says, maybe, I don't know, your own car. This is something China could do with its 5G and its Internet of Things. It could create a block on your car. So if you're going 100 kilometers an hour past a school, bang, your car slows down or your car stops. That could happen. But again,
mhm,
what happens to the cars coming behind that? It could cause accidents that kill innocent people or injure innocent people. There's got to be some way of analyzing this and saying, this is what it's going to be. So anyone who's traveling to the hospital with an injured case, a pregnant case in the back, needs to be able to freely travel to the hospital. So if you imagine if you're taking your wife to hospital for an emergency and suddenly a speed trap comes up and shreds your tires, it's not a
mhm.
good look, is it?
Yeah. Um, I think that there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of questions to be asked as to what could be done. A car is just they're everywhere, and that can be weaponized in
Cars can
ways
be
that
weaponized. Yeah.
we are seeing.
One
So,
one
what
thing
would
I've
be the
seen
measure? Yeah.
in places where defense is very important, military places like that, they create a chicane, and
Hmm.
maybe schools will do that. A chicane might be the answer. Now, what does that mean? They put blocks on the road, on both sides of the road, so the cars have to go through the blocks, round and then around and then around again and then off. So the school, outside the school, you don't have the ability to pick up speed. Those blocks will slow you down. That might be the answer. And then if you are taking your wife to hospital, you just go a different route or you slow down. You can't go past these things. and it's much less lethal than the potential of shredding someone's tires at 100 kilometers an hour, which could also cause the car to tip and kill innocent people at the bus stop
Mm.
outside the school. You've really got to think about that. I think chicanery, which is what the BBC are guilty of, is the answer.
All right. So, friends, that's what we wanted to talk about. Particularly, the message that we want to leave out there is the importance of monitoring social media to avoid copycats,
Yes.
the importance of freedom of speech in China that allows these people to say things that we then have to come out here and present to you as just opinions or lies or misrepresentations of the truth that exists here in China, and I think that that's the message that we wanted to convey to you. Once again, our hearts go to the families of the people who have passed away during these incidents. And bear in mind, as we said at the beginning, these are really rare here in China. China
Mhm.
continues to be a very safe place. Um, we're not going to go into comparisons, but just keep that in mind. Also, before we go, thank you to all those of you who send super chats. My channel, Media Without Means, is not monetized yet. So that goes on to Jerry. But you can help by subscribing to this channel, Media Without Means, and follow me on Twitter, also Medios Sin Medios, that's in the Spanish, or go to my website where I will post all these and many more articles, mediawithoutmeans.org. And make sure also to follow Jerry's channel. Sorry, Jerry, any last words? Any last ideas?
Yeah, one last thing that is being touted on many of my comments is that this whole thing is a part of a color revolution being organized from outside the country. I would say the chances of that are extremely, extremely low. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's very, very unlikely. And I don't want to get too much into the speculation, but I think if people are watching this and thinking that joining these dots together, if it was a color revolution, it would be happening in cities where America has a presence. And Zhuhai is not one of them. Shandong,
Mhm.
Tai'an, I think it's called, the city where it happened last night. These are purely crazy people doing crazy things during a crazy
At
time.
crazy times.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right, friends. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, if you like this content, give it a thumbs up and leave your comments, share, and see you on the next show.
Thanks very
Thank you so
much.
much.